Hi! Welcome to or back to my booktube channel. Today we are going to be talking about all the books that I read in January. I read 6 books and I think overall it was a really good month for reading. I felt like I enjoyed a majority of the books that I read. A couple of them were rereads, but for the most part these were all new to me reading for the first time, and several of them were new releases for the month of January as well. The first book that I finished reading in the month of January, I actually finished on New Year's Day. I had started it in the last couple of days of December and finished it on New Year's Day, and that is Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood. This was my second ever Ali Hazelwood book. I had only ever read Bride by her, and I had heard good things from this and decided to give it a go, and I absolutely love this book. I rated it 5 stars. I know this is generally more spicy than some of Ali's other books, but I also thought that there was a really good plot to this book as well. I thought the conflict in it between the two main characters and what was going on in their lives were really good, and I thought the chemistry between the two characters were just unmatched. I had never really been interested in reading, Love Theoretically or any of her other books before, but this definitely made me interested in reading more, and it made me very, very excited for her new book coming out in, I think, next week. And I hope that it's just as good as this, because this was truly such a great way to start off my reading for 2025. The next book that I read was Throne of Glass. This is my second time reading Throne of Glass, and this time I actually listened to the audiobook only. One of my goals for 2025 was to completely reread Throne of Glass from start to finish. Specifically, listen to every audiobook start to finish. I feel like Elizabeth Evans, who narrates all of the audiobooks for Throne of Glass, does such an amazing job at conveying the emotion and telling the story. Sometimes when I listen to audiobooks, I'm more easily able to pick up things and make connections that I otherwise maybe would have missed while reading. Especially because this is my second time reading the Throne of Glass series. The very first time I read Throne of Glass, I just became all consumed with the story and just was reading it as fast as humanly possible. And I felt like I missed a lot of things that people love about the Throne of Glass series. So far, going back and listening, it's just making me fall in love with this series all over again. It's truly like reading it for the first time again. Along that same vein, I also read Crown of Midnight this month as well. I enjoyed this so much. Because I have already read all of Throne of Glass, it's so interesting and so cool to see all the little nuggets of information that are in Crown of Midnight that end up coming back into play at the very end of the series. That's one of the really interesting things about the Throne of Glass series in general, is watching the main character's actions in every facet of her life come back to her and have an impact later on in her life and later on in the story. It truly is just such a wonderful time getting to relive these moments again, and I'm just having such a wonderful time. If I had more audiobook hours and more time on my hand, I would do nothing but sit and listen to Throne of Glass until I was done with Kingdom of Ash. The first time I read both of these, I rated them both 3 stars. I clearly didn't know what the heck I was talking about when I read it the first time, because these are definitely not 3-star reads. These are way better than that. The next book that I read in January is Beg, Borrow, or Steal by Sarah Adams. I love Sarah Adams. I have read almost every single one of her books at this point, and I especially love her When in Rome series, which this is the 3rd book in that series. This just came out in January as well, and I was so excited for this book. I had to wait a couple extra days for it to come in the mail, but as soon as it came in the mail, I dropped everything that I was doing and picked it up and read it, and this was a 5-star read for me. Everything about this was great. The story, the characters, the plot, the writing, everything about it was just fantastic. And this was just one of those books where I saw a lot of myself in the main character and felt like I could relate to her and the things that she goes through and the things that she struggles with. That just made me love this book even more, because it was just so relatable. Sarah truly understood the kind of character that she was writing when she wrote this book. It's a rivals to lovers story, which that's one of my favorite tropes out there, is enemies to lovers or rivals to lovers. And I think that this is just kind of done really, really well. Definitely my favorite Sarah Adams book so far that she has ever written. And I highly, highly recommend this to anybody out there. When I look back at 2025 and all of the new releases that I've read, I feel like this is going to be up there as one of the best, and it's only January. The 5th book that I read in January was probably the most anticipated release of, for sure, January, maybe all of 2025. You could argue, I know Abby Jimenez and Emily Henry have books coming out, but this is probably up there, and it's Onyx Storm. This one I have a lot of thoughts and opinions on. This was not as good as Fourth Wing and Iron Flame. I had a lot of issues with the writing in it. It felt rushed and it felt sloppy, in my opinion. And the first half of the book felt completely different from the second half of the book. The first half felt so rushed, and a lot of the things that happened I felt like should have had a much bigger impact on the story, and they just didn't. There were so many things that were left unexplored in that moment, and I'm trying not to give spoilers here, but there were just things that happened that should have had such an effect on the characters and the story, and it just went nowhere. The pacing in the first half of this book was also kind of atrocious in my opinion. It just felt so rushed, and it was just a constant like on the move, doing this next thing, doing this next thing, doing this other thing. And like I said before, like nothing was being explored. And if you had those moments of connecting with the new characters we're meeting along the way, or getting a chance to process the information that's coming in, I think the pacing would have felt a lot better. Because in the second half of the book, it was a lot better. It really felt like a completely different book. The second half of the book felt very much like Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, where a lot of things were happening and a lot of plans were being made, but it was a much more enjoyable read because the pace of those things happening on the page were easier to digest. I almost wish she had taken this book and chopped it in half. And that first part of the book and that first initial journey and mission that they go on in this book, again, try not to give away too many spoilers, but that first journey that they go on in the book had such potential to be so interesting and so fascinating. There were things that happened in that first half of the book that would come back and have a huge impact on the second half, but because they weren't written about and explored very well in that moment in time, it didn't really make sense in the second half, and it didn't have the same level of impact that it could have had. And so I really wish that that first half was its own separate book, that it had the time to properly breathe, and then you take what happened in the second half of this book and either connect it to whatever's going to happen next in the story, or have that be its own separate story. Because the two were so different that they just clashed. And at the end of the day, like, it ruined my enjoyment of this. The second half definitely redeemed it, and the cliffhanger at the end certainly redeemed it. But because how much I did not enjoy the first half of the book, I ended up rating this 3 stars. And I'm really disappointed by it because I was very excited for this release. And then finally I have Under Lock and Key by Lana Ferguson. Disclaimer, I do still have about 80 pages left in it, but I am counting it because I do plan on finishing this by midnight tonight. It is January 31st. I do plan on finishing this by midnight tonight. But this is another one that I'm not enjoying. And at this point, I'm so far into it, I'm committed to it, but it's just, this also has its issues. I don't think the two main characters have very good chemistry together. I don't think that they would be a couple in real life. And the way the main male character talks about some attributes of the female main character is kind of icky. Like, there's so many times throughout the book that he talks about how awful sounding her laugh is. Like, he just keeps bringing up the fact that her laugh is so terrible sounding. But in the next sentence he goes, but she's cute though. And I'm like, you just said you hate her laugh. And there's some other things that the main female character does that he thinks is just horribly ugly. And you can't tell me that that is okay. You can't tell me that that would work in real life. The only reason that I haven't DNF'd this is because of the mystery plot in this book is enough to keep me going. I think the cousin to the main female character is up to something and I want to know what it is. And they're also trying to solve a curse and I want to see how that resolves. But I could care less about the romance plot in this book. I literally am skipping chapters at this point anytime that there's any kind of romance scene on the page because it's just not good and I'm not interested in it, and I'd rather just have this be like a mystery novel. This is probably gonna end up being like a 2-star read for me. I don't hand out 2 stars very often. This is probably gonna be one of them. And it's really disappointing because I know this was another one that a lot of people were looking forward to. I'm in it for right now and I'm determined to finish it. And because it's the very last day of January and I read most of it at this point and I plan on finishing it by the end of tonight, I'm including it in my January recap video. Alright, well that was everything that I read in the month of January. I had 3 5-star reads in the month of January, which is really, really good. There were some months last year that I didn't read a single 5-star read in a month. So I would say that overall this was a really good month of reading. I am looking forward to the month of February and I am excited to share my February TBR with you in a future video. Let me know what your favorite book of January was and what is one book you are looking forward to reading in the month of February. And I will catch you in the next one. See you later. Bye.